Joining us on the program right now is Representative Jody Hice, Georgia's 10th District. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Happy New Year to you.
Okay, what is Joe Biden going to strike out at in Georgia? You have more early voting days than his home state of Delaware.
Well, that's right. You and I both know this has nothing to do with any of that, though. This is all about trying to create a narrative of some erroneous concept of voter suppression in Georgia, and it just simply does not exist. As you mentioned, I mean, you can look at New York, New Jersey, Delaware. There are multiple states all over the country that are much more restrictive than Georgia is, and we have Georgia has a great track record, and we've got this past election we had more voters than ever. Listen, here's the deal about suppression. Let's just be honest with it. The Democrats want to take over on the federal level. They want a federal takeover of the elections. They want to make sure that ballot harvesting is legal, that voter identification is virtually banned in every state. They want to take away states' rights, which is constitutionally authorized, by the way. So this is a constitutional issue, a power grab, a seizing of power. But voter suppression comes whenever there is an illegal vote cast. That suppresses the vote of a legal vote that is cast. And the Democrats are trying to set up a strategy where they accuse others of the very thing they themselves are guilty of. So they're accusing Georgians of voter suppression when all the while what they are trying to do is set up through a federal bill the capacity for them to cheat through ballot harvesting and a host of other things, thereby suppressing the votes of legal voters in the state of Georgia. And they want to make this national. And Biden today is in Atlanta making this kind of push. It's offensive. It's wrong. And I think they are going to lose this battle at the end of the day.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't former Governor Perdue, set up the ability of people to get an acceptable voter ID for free? Wasn't that something that was changed under your former governor?
Yeah, I think it was Purdue, but I know it's there. Yeah, it costs nothing. If someone
okay, so regardless,
98% have a driver's license, those who don't can get a free government ID. Yeah.
So when Stacey Abrams and others make the claim that voter ID laws are somehow inherently racist, which they are not, because then that would mean it would be inherently racist to get on an airplane or stay in a hotel or enter a federal court building or anything for that matter that requires ID, that there is no issue with people for whatever reasons financially to not have ID. It's free. It's no charge.
Absolutely, and it's easy to get. And look, you have to have ID to enter into a football game. You know, like you've got. And by the way, look, catch this: the same administration right now that is pushing for vaccine passports in order to eat at a restaurant here in Washington, D.C. I mean, this is an intrusion into your health care, your private health matters, having to reveal a vaccine mandate in order to eat in a restaurant. This same administration is now trying to get rid of identification of any kind in order to vote. The hypocrisy of it is just obscene, and yet that's what they're trying to push. And again, I believe this will never make it through the Senate, but just the fact that we are dealing with this and that the Democratic Party that they are seriously trying to push this, it really identifies exactly who they are and that they will go to any lengths in order to get what they want and to push their agenda through the American people.
Now, what about the issue of drop boxes? There was a question as to who would operate drop boxes. I believe the new Georgia voting law places the responsibility in the hands of the 159 county boards of election officials that operate across the, not third party civic organizations, right? So, nobody, you're not going to have the NRA running drop boxes, right? This is something that now is going to be the sole function of the Board of Elections, not civic organizations. So the drop boxes are now official in nature. Is that correct?
That is correct. And look, I'm not a fan of the drop boxes. We've never had them until this last election. And now all of a sudden they've become a part of Georgia law. There will be at least one in every county, but they will no longer be placed outside. They will no longer be unmonitored. They will be placed inside a voting precinct, only open and only available during the hours of actual voting, be that from 6 to 6 or whatever time frame that the actual voting has occurred, and there is required to be someone monitoring that drop box inside the voting precinct. So, if you've got to have drop boxes, I think this is a good way to do it. But look, I'm not a fan of the drop boxes anyway. I think people need to vote in person, and those who can't, they have other means whereby they can cast their votes. But it's a different ball game now with the drop boxes in Georgia. They'll no longer be outside, unmonitored. Now only inside and monitored during working voting hours.
It's funny. I live in New Jersey, and the town where I live, they put the drop box at the public safety building. So it's literally within an eye shot of the police department and with several cameras around it. I would think this is something I don't understand, Representative. You would think that if Democrats are talking about the sanctity of the ballot, that they would want official monitoring and security of any drop box, that they wouldn't want, that there would be a standard for the security of the drop box, right? Because let's just imagine, if they're worried about people tampering with the ballots. Let's say you have a predominantly minority neighborhood, you wouldn't want this alleged existential threat of racist organizations to know, well, there's a bunch of unsecured drop boxes filled with ballots from black voters. We're just going to go blow them up. You would think that we're all in agreement here that if we believe in the sanctity of the vote and in the integrity of our election system, that we'd want to make sure that the best security possible was provided to that sacred ballot.
You would think. Look, we are a government a system that only operates based upon the consent of the governed. And the epicenter, if you will, of the consent of the governed is their voice that is expressed at the ballot box. And if ever the voice of the people, the voice of the consent of the governed is violated or compromised at the ballot box, then we are in serious, serious trouble in this country, because no longer would it be a government that is based upon the consent of the governed. And when you're talking about drop boxes that are unmonitored, that are left out there just for whatever to happen in terms of placing ballots in there, that becomes a frightful thing. It becomes something that only common sense tells you needs to be monitored, needs to be looked upon. Otherwise, we are risking the threat of losing the voice of the people being expressed at the ballot box. So you would think that both sides of the aisle, regardless of political affiliation, would want at all cost for every vote to be monitored, only one legal vote cast, only one legal vote counted. That includes the drop boxes. You would think that would be the case, but unfortunately that's not the case, because the intent of the Democratic Party now is not for secure elections of integrity, but for tipping the scales in their favor, and drop boxes and other means are a way for them to accomplish that.
Let's go to another thing. Joe Biden, over and over, you can't give out water. Nobody said that people who are waiting in line should not be able to have some form of refreshment. What this new law says is only the county board of elections can provide these things. Again, back to, I wonder how the Democrats would respond if the NRA was handing out steak sandwiches, right? If the NRA was standing, 150 feet or 200 feet or whatever the line is, or going right up to the line saying, hey, you want a steak sandwich? We're with the NRA. They would lose their minds. Right, so if there's going to be some form of refreshment for people who've been waiting in line, that should be provided by the Board of Elections and not political groups trying to affect the vote.
Exactly, and people can bring their own water if they want to. But yeah, what this is just trying to prevent is candidates or people from one party or one group from another having an influence on the voters within a certain distance of the actual voting place. And inside whatever that line is, 150 feet or whatever, only those who are working the polls are allowed to provide water or whatever it may be that they want to provide. That only makes sense. It's common sense. You don't want people having their arms twisted, so to speak, to vote a certain way by candidates or certain political parties, whatever it may be, to trying to influence voters prior to the actual time that they cast that vote. And again, common sense ought to prevail, but unfortunately, I believe common sense is not the reason behind the Democratic push right now for some of these federal takeover attempts of our elections.
I sincerely hope that, and I'm going to say when, because I think we're all in agreement that Republicans are going to have a good year this year. There needs to be, some look-see by the Congress at these jurisdictions like now the city of New York that are going to allow citizens of other nations to vote in elections. The Democrats keep talking about, these unjust Republican-driven election laws. These are the people that want people who are in the country illegally to have their vote counted. And they're not even hiding it anymore. They're codifying it. The Democrats talk about the democracy, our democracy, our democracy. Well, is it really our democracy if citizens from other nations are voting in our elections?
Exactly. I mean, that's a frightful thing. And, this is one of the reasons that we need to be glad that we are in a republic that we are in, and that we are based upon the electoral college that we are, so that these massive centers of populations, when they do horrible things like this, they don't sway the entire country. But a small state has a voice just as a highly populated state. And this is, I believe those types of attempts ultimately are going to be challenged in court. Why in the world would we even think about allowing people from other countries to come into here and vote and to impact our direction politically? It's unthinkable. I believe it can constitutionally be challenged, and I believe it will be. But the fact that they're coming out of the closet, as you say, and making this a outspoken position of the Democratic Party is really a frightful thing.
So what part of this, other than the Democrats using race as a criticism of everything, what specifically could potentially keep someone from the polls for simply being black or Hispanic or Asian or what have you? Having an identifying number, most notably issued from a state ID, accompanying other information on a mail-in ballot, simply gives the Board of Elections the ability to verify and trace back the ballot to the voter. Having signatures and security envelopes and all these other things. What I don't understand how this affects people who are non-white, right? Here they are talking about Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, banning Republicans on accusation of insurrection. I thought the Democrats believed in equal protection under the law. The voting law is for all of us. We all must, register to vote legally. It's not election season. It's election day. the idea that there needs to be this sort of rolling, open process where, well, if ballots show up at 3:00 in the morning with no signatures on them, we don't know who cast them, where they were dropped off, but we're going to count them because, we have to count all the ballots. No, I think we as conservatives and Republicans want to count all the legal ballots, and there's a distinguishing quality there. So I don't understand what somehow would keep somebody, because of the color of their skin, from following these simple processes to make sure that all legal votes are counted fairly and transparently.
Absolutely. There is nothing. We are all on the same level ground when it comes to casting a vote. And that is, are you a legally registered voter? And if you are, then you are free to vote. And it's easier to vote now than it's ever been before. There are so many different methods, whether it be in person, early, absentee ballot, or a drop box, as if that's in the state where you live. It's easier to vote than ever before. It's easier to register than ever before. We are all on the same level ground when it comes to those type of requirements in order to vote, and it's free to get an identification if you don't have a driver's license. So all the arguments, they are bogus arguments. And again, it comes back to the reality of what's behind the argument here. It is to tip the scales in favor of the Democratic Party. And in order to do that, they accuse everyone else of voter suppression with these lies, the rhetoric that have no foundation behind them whatsoever. But that's not the issue. Voter suppression is not the issue. I would challenge anyone to mention to come up with one person whose vote was suppressed, that they did not have the opportunity to vote if they were legally registered. Now, we've had some cases where I've heard of where people went and they were told that they had already voted, but that comes down to there was some cheating going on. But as far as a person legally registered, they have the opportunity to vote, and they can cast a provisional ballot and correct whatever is wrong at the moment. So it's never been easier to register. It's never been easier to vote. But the Democrats are not trying to accomplish that. It's all about, as I said, tipping the scales in their favor.
Well, we're going to watch some of these fights play out over non-citizen voting. I think the Democrats in New York are going to find themselves up against the state constitution, right? There are citizenship provisions in the state constitution. They can't simply, but don't tell me you give, what about election integrity when you're saying, well, why shouldn't we let people in the country illegally vote? Well, they pay taxes. Oh, just be careful what you wish for about tying tax paying to voting, right? Be very careful what you wish for. But don't tell me about election integrity and the sanctity of the ballot and our democracy and all of this fluff and patter when your party is literally working night and day to grant the vote to people who've crossed the border illegally. I don't want to hear it from you.
Extremely well said. That's spot on, and that's exactly a part of the battle that is behind all of this so-called voter integrity reform. And keep in mind, too, that what they are trying to do is to instill these laws on a federal level, which bypasses and undermines the attempts of various states to secure their elections. The Democrats want to make this a national thing so that they can eliminate all the work that's been done by so many states to make sure that they have free and fair elections. And that's why the Constitution, Article 1, Section 4, makes it very clear that elections, the time, place, and manner of elections are to be left to the states, not the federal government. So that even in itself is a legal challenge that I believe is certain to come if by chance some of these federal takeover attempts become actual law.
Well, it's going to be interesting watching New York because the state constitution guarantees the right to vote to all citizens over the age of 18, not residents. There's a distinguishing quality. But again, and I got to wrap up here, the Democrats, if they had their way, I mean, maybe we should just get rid of, why bother with this, right? Why not just, have every election in the nation be at large? And if conservatives want to start affecting things in places like San Francisco, we could just start watching busloads of people from Texas or Oklahoma or wherever start, filing into San Francisco to vote for mayor. I mean, if they're staying in hotels, they're technically paying a tax to stay in that hotel to that jurisdiction. They're residing in the jurisdiction. If they bed down for the night, why not?
Yeah, and you look, we had the Trump administration accused of all sorts of Russian collusion and Russian interference with the elections. Can you imagine what countries like Russia and China and others would do if it's opened up to any person who is in the United States being able to vote? All of a sudden, we would have millions potentially from some of these other countries showing up prior to an election to alter the political structure of our country. It's insane to even think of such a thing. And so, yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in New York and other places as it relates to the attempts to enable and allow non-citizens to vote. It's insanity to think of such a thing.
Okay, last point. Why do you think Stacey Abrams doesn't want to appear with Joe Biden?
Well, I think it's indicative of the horrible leadership that Joe Biden has provided. Look, here we're just a few months away from primaries, and yet what do we have? We have crime on the rise, inflation on the rise. We've got our borders that are in chaos. We have poll numbers dipping for Democrats and Joe Biden to record lows. All of this taking place, Joe Biden's signature piece of legislation has stalled out and died in the Senate. And, I mean, he is a failed leader. He is leading us down over a cliff, he and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. And I think Stacey Abrams is wise enough to look at this and say, these people are bad to associate with. And she's smart enough of a politician to recognize that their company does not help her. And so I think she's avoiding them like a plague.
All right, I got to leave it there. Representative Jody Hice, Georgia 10th District, thanks for joining us. We'll get you back on the program soon.
Always great to be with you. Thank you.